Good. I am super happy to be with you. I'm Elizabeth Wysen, and I'm here in southern Ecuador where I live. And so you can see a little bit of the vibes behind you and some Ecuadorian butterflies here. But just wanted to connect here today. I'm very glad for all these different processes. And I'm here to help you wrap them all up with a beautiful golden thread. So you've got lots of different wonderful skills and tools under your belt now. But how do you know fully that you've embodied these things? How do you know for yourself as a creator being that you're really in the divine order? And how do you know how to use these tools and when? So I think that's a really nice way to wrap things up today. And so first, how do you know you've integrated something? Well, it takes a while to integrate something. It actually can take up to 6 months to completely change a way of being. But the good news is that the neurons, they happen immediately, right? So it's a journey, it's a process. And then once you've integrated something, imagine how in those 6 months you're integrating other things too. So there's lots of layers and layers to integration in the physical form and in your different dimensional bodies. And so the first sign, though, is that you've emotionally accepted these changes. And that means something really interesting because that means that you have to recognize that emotionally we're trained to not expect these changes to work. We're trained to want immediate feedback, right? The dopamine land of the matrix. And we are also trained to be really frustrated and doubt ourselves and doubt our soul and doubt God. So how do you fix that? Well, first and foremost, whenever a thought comes up that says, well, that felt really nice, but I don't really know if it's giving me any real change, you need to bow to your brain because your brain is a beautiful petri dish of what I call natural ego. There's natural ego, and natural ego keeps you alive. Natural ego keeps you from getting hit by a bus when you cross the street, right? And we get these little programs. Remember how in like the 80s and 90s, maybe even earlier than that, they would have those little crystal growing kits, and you'd put a tablet in the kit, and then it would grow this structure, right? You didn't really have to do that much. You had some like vinegar and water or something, and there'd be a chemical reaction that would grow these little tablets in this medium. Well, the medium is your natural ego, and the programs, they come from the matrix, and they create these structures in your brain that we call the ego, but we ought to call it more like the matrix ego. And so that distorts everything. And the only way to stop yourself from being oppressed by the matrix ego and getting to the bottom of these programs is to objectify your thoughts. So you have to really look past your thoughts and say, all right, these thoughts, they're not, most of them aren't really from my soul. We'll get into that in a second. These aren't really from my soul because they're continuing to try to make me survive in the matrix, and that's not where I live anymore. I live in the divine order. I've always lived in the divine order. The matrix is an illusion. I'm walking out. It's a big mindset shift to say I'm not buying the classical way of these things I've learned. I'm gonna go work with divine order, and you're gonna stop tying your desire to manifest and your fear that you won't to your process. So to simplify that, your desires and fears are the matrix ego, and they distort everything. They keep you from truly integrating at a cellular level all the cool stuff you've learned. So in order to recognize that, again, you have to be very objective about your brain. And objectivity is very beautiful for the self because it doesn't dismiss your feelings and it doesn't dismiss your lived experience, but instead it gives you a sense of the real you, which is your I am presence. It's the first dimension of consciousness. It is your soul. And the soul is much bigger than your body. People say that the body contains the soul, and it's the other way around. Your soul contains the body because your soul is very immense and it has access to the whole universe, right? And that's the creator being self. It's the immortal self. You are not your body. I am not Elizabeth. That's the name of my body, right? So once you realize, okay, I'm being blocked by fear and desire, and when they pop up, like, oh, what if I don't really remember these things that I've been learning? What if my body doesn't respond? What if my trauma gets in the way? What if God is a jerk? What if my soul is a jerk? I've heard all these sorts of things being a counselor for so long. And the truth is that those aren't real. Those are a distortion that got grown in the petri dish of who you really are. So you got to dismantle them. And one of the fastest ways to do that is gratitude. And so right now, I want you to notice all the doubts that might have come up today and all the different feelings you've had with these processes and not really, there might be parts of you that aren't sure that you really integrated them or not. And I want you to bow to that part of your brain and say, thank you so much for trying to help me. Thank you for trying to help me survive. But I'm the soul in charge and I have a different plan. We don't need to live in the matrix anymore. We don't need to manifest by fear and desire anymore. And there's a different way. And my way, the way I intend as the soul, is the divine order, where you don't have to do the work of manifesting so much as you have to surrender to the order, which is a beautiful, already naturally occurring and synchronized method of being that allows all things to exist in a specific way. So that specific way is that all the suffering you've been through, you were actually supposed to go through it. It's a revaluing of suffering when you recognize how the divine order really works. And this is another way for you to know if you've truly integrated, if you've truly internalized all of your tools and all these different processes, is that you feel more synced up to an order beyond you that actually is a state of unconditional love. But what it does is it actually allows you to recognize that suffering is really valuable and it's consciousness under pressure, and that there's an infinite loop of life that we go through to actually recognize our consciousness goes through pressure and then it goes through breakthroughs. And all matter, all material, all reality, all energy, all consciousness in this universe goes through that cycle endlessly. So that makes sense that the matrix then would have to exist, because the human species, Homo sapiens, we have had to go through 66 12,000-year cycles that put us under huge amounts of pressure. And then we've been through an immense amount of attention and oppression at a galactic scale. And that's actually how evolution works. It's these punctuated moments of breakthrough. And we're on the verge of that, which is why it feels really, really hard to remember who you are and why there's so many people on Earth. There's literally more human beings here on Earth than all of the 66 12,000-year cycles we've been through combined. And that tells you we're on the verge of something, because we actually are. We're at the end of a astrophysics galactical cycle. And that cycle is an 800,000-year cycle. So I'm an anthropologist, and I like to talk about how astrophysics affects human evolution, and we call that galactic anthropology, but it's literally a science, right? And then we have quantum anthropology, which is how does the human consciousness affect the quantum field? And how does the quantum field affect human consciousness and evolution and culture building? Right? So these are actually real branches of science. And that's the broad spectrum I'm introducing you to now, but also giving you a chance to make it practical. So gratitude shuts down the matrix thinking, the programs in your head. Think of it this way. We'll take an adage of don't say anything unless you have something nice to say. And you're going to tell that to your brain now. And you're going to bow to your brain. And every time you have a doubt or question about reality, I want you to bow to your brain and say, thank you very much. Because gratitude is the only way to make your brain stop its matrix thinking. It wants to help you. And so the egoic structure, however, it's been purposefully planted there in little seeds, and you're going to weed the garden with your gratitude, and you're going to plant new seeds by saying, I am the soul in charge, and here is a different plan. My plan is to function in the divine order and only that. Now, how do you then function that way? First, you have to embrace the I am. One of the ways you're going to make sure that all the things you've learned today that are so valuable to you from really wonderful teachers, and anytime that you're learning, if you're here, you're probably consistently trying to seek out more truth. And if that's the case, then you're going to want to discern. Ego can't help you discern. It's only the full body experience that can help you discern. And the most and powerful and best way to discern is to first and foremost understand who you really are. So you're shifting your identity. You are no longer the body. You are no longer oriented in the 3D. You're not heading towards the 5D to go live there either. The human is more complicated than that. You have access to 12 dimensions all at once. You don't have to move anywhere. You already live there. You already live in all of the dimensions of consciousness. The human being is designed that way. And the human body is a technology for that. So we have access to 12 dimensions of consciousness. We don't need to try to get to 5D. It's already there. You have an open floor plan condo that is your body. So really important for you to recognize the first dimension, the entry point from the soul. It's probably, in my opinion, all of the other dimensions do not matter, and you won't understand them truly unless you're willing to start with the first. Don't worry about fifth dimension or anything like that. The first one, you can't enjoy your condo unless you're aware of the first dimension, which is I am. I exist. Therefore, I am loved. There is no reason for you to have to earn love. You don't have to earn your divine rights. And so once you recognize the I am presence, which is maintained far beyond your body, then you start to recognize you have some rights. You have divine rights in this natural and beautiful divine order. And these are your rights. You have immense amount of rights, but some of them are, you have the divine right to have a clear and focused mind that is healthy. You have the divine right to have the exact right relationships that you need for your growth and your happiness. You have the divine right for the exact right, perfect home. You have the divine right for the exact right pay, for the exact right kind of work that fulfills your divine purpose. And you have the divine right to have more than enough to share, more than enough to give to charity, more than enough to be able to take really good care of yourself. And you have the divine right to be able to grasp the idea that divinity is here to do the work for you, and that your job is to be totally embodied of the spirit, so that the spirit, which is your soul, can actually attain what we call novel experience. And all of us are attaining novel experience all the time. You're already in the natural order. Everything exists because of it, even the matrix. So all you have to do is recognize, well, where does this, castle of Mordor that is the Matrix exist? It already exists in the divine order, which is why the divine order doesn't put up with it anymore, and it's crumbling to little pieces in front of you, right? So once you grasp that, then you're really on a roll. And the second thing you can do is, how do you know exactly where you're at in your journey of integrating and processing and becoming more connected to the soul? It's what I call synchrony. You're synchronized up with divinity. Well, there's some phenomena that happen in your body for you to actually experience these things. And one of them is that you start to see patterns. So many of you see number patterns. So many of you see word patterns. You sometimes, like, for example, I'll hear a phrase in a dream, and then later that day, I'll hear that phrase in different places, totally separately, that have nothing to do with each other, because there's a patterning going on. There's a synchrony that's trying to show me something that we might call qualia. I didn't coin that term, Cliff High did, but he talks about the ontology, which is what I call the source field or source God or the divine order. And from that, we have a relationship with it. And so it's always trying to talk to you. God is always trying to talk to you, and it's going to be through these patterns. So all sorts of patterns, and they'll be all over the place. Deja vu is another key point where you experience those things. And then the ability to speak to the field and the field to respond. And what that means is, just for example, recently I had to move, and I was told by like 4 different people in one day, Elizabeth, you need to move. And they didn't really realize how big of a deal that was to me, but they all were totally separate from each other. And in one day, I had 4 people say, you need to move. It's very important. It's very serious. You have to move. And they didn't know my situation fully, not really. And yet they said all of that. And it was a bunch of female friends of mine. I took it very seriously. I said, hey, that's a pattern that I can't deny. And it's like in my face. And so I said, all right, well, if the divine wants me to move, then I am going to start packing my house. And my boyfriend said, well, where are we going to live? I'm like, I don't know. We're going to find out. And so I pack up my house, and I had a bunch of animals and stuff, and even horses and things. And I said, God, if you want me to move, I got to find a home for these beautiful animals. They have the divine right to the perfect home. And in fact, in 1 week, with very little effort, I found homes for every single one of my animals, and they were actually better homes than what I was able to provide. So even though my home was nice, they're in heaven now, and they're completely beautifully taken care of. It's super beautiful. And then I said, well, I'm all packed. I don't know where to live still. And randomly my friend calls me up and says, hey, this person's renting their house. Do you want to go look at it? And it was a friend of mine who I knew. And I thought, well, wow, that's serendipitous. And so we go look at this house, and it was perfect in every way. And I said, I'm ready to sign. And we moved in a week later. So I didn't even have to look for a house. It literally showed up in my text messages. That's synchrony, right? So you'll know you're really on track when that happens. You'll know you're off track when you're having a hard time connecting, when everything seems to like completely get distorted. And then more and more doubt is built. And that's why we have to always work towards surrendering. The number one way to synchronize with the divine order is to recognize that your divine rights work within laws of the physics of consciousness. And when you are willing, totally and utterly, to relinquish all of your personal will, all of your fear and desire to that, then you get to synchronize. It's when you feel like you have to be in control, or when you don't trust, which is a law. You can't actually function in the divine order if you don't trust. if you don't trust the source of all things, if you don't trust God, if you don't trust your soul, which comes directly from God. So you have to trust. You see, the laws of consciousness and the divine rights, they don't act like boxes. They don't act like human laws. Human laws say, if you cross this line, then this horrible consequence is going to happen to you, right? But divine law is opposite. It says, if you recognize this in yourself, then all these wonderful things are going to happen to you. And so you have to actually completely surrender your personal will. One of the most important steps to being a creator of your reality and living in synchrony, less so necessarily the idea of manifestation, perhaps, but more synchronizing with the source field, the origin of this universe, then you're going to have to actually totally surrender your will to all of these different, very clear divine rights that are working in your favor. And they're saying, literally, if you let go entirely, all these things are working in your favor. They all work naturally. But the number one thing is anything that comes up, any suffering, any desires, any attachments, any expectations, where you expect people to be this way, or you expect things to go wrong. All of your attachments are, you think you love this thing until they piss you off. And then in that moment, you don't feel that same level of love. And then you also have to work with all of your judgment. Judgment is your discernment in your body being run through trauma. So it's not really real discernment. It's distorted discernment. It's distorted truth, which is why, as people who might have been really deeply traumatized, you're going to have to recognize that most of the decisions and ideas you have about relationships and reality are distorted by your trauma. That's why trauma healing is the number one way to help yourself. I've provided you today a special ebook about healing your mind, your heart, and your gut. It'll match really nicely with everyone else's work today. And it's short, it's 50 pages. It's simple techniques, really, really easy little exercises that you can even teach children. And it's easy for anyone to read. I also address the importance of healing the divine masculine in that book, which is one of the most important things we can be doing at the moment. So for those of you divine feminine, if you have a divine masculine in your life that needs a boost, this book is very logical and it's really easy. And it's a good start with basic practices that can totally change people's relationship with their divine reality. But it doesn't actually have that much woo-woo going on. It's really factual. Sahar, it's in the chat right there, right above you. It's called Healing the Three Minds, the Brain, the Heart, and the Gut. And it's downloadable there in the chat. Yeah, enjoy. And it's short. And like I said, share this one freely. You'll find it's less about, I talk about the Dantian centers. It's less about mysticism and more about really specific techniques to heal your trauma in the now. Having had complex PTSD myself and always constantly working on myself, some of the techniques are stuff that I have been using for over 15 to 20 years. And they work really, really well. And I think that you'll find them really easy, but more so modify them, right? These techniques were based off of psychology techniques that I learned to heal my trauma from psychologists, but I had to modify them to make them work for me. And I encourage you to do the same if you want to do that. So don't worry about giving any kudos. Don't worry about it working with exactly how I talk about it or whatever. It's trauma healing should be flexible and it should fit the person, right? And these techniques are easy enough, again, that even little kids can use them. So then lastly is the synchrony piece, getting deeper and recognizing that to synchronize, we have to have these patterns show up in our life, that it's already naturally built in that way. And the best thing you can do is surrender utterly all of these structures. So if you have a judgment pop up, if you have an expectation, if you have an attachment, especially, oh, big one, attachment to outcomes, that's probably the biggest one that is unacknowledged. Attachments to your purpose, attachments to star families or techniques or people or situations or objects. There's a lot. Attachment is unconditional love distorted by trauma. And expectations are being really present, distorted by trauma, so that you're basically worrying about the past happening, and then you just leak a bunch of energy and lose your ability to be present. And in order to dismantle all of the resistance of you living in natural law, you acknowledge every single one of these and all the feelings that go with it. And then you say, now take this, and you spend it. You spend it by offering it to Source God. And you say, take this from me. Take this from me now and turn it into blessings. You pay it forward. And more so, it's not just your trauma, it's your genetic lineage trauma too. You're incredibly mind-blowingly wealthy when it comes to energy, because trauma is heavy. It's like gold. You can spend it. So if there's stuff coming up in your family, spend it. You spend it. You say, take this nugget of alcoholism, take this nugget of traumatic injuries, take this nugget of genetic issues. Dear God, spend this and make it into miracles. And then watch as you tap in to the greatest law that has to do with creating your reality. And that's the law of generosity and abundance. They are married. Generosity and abundance are married. You cannot have abundance without generosity because of physics. So literally, you're making room by spending this very condensed energy, and you're saying, take it and spend it, make miracles to God. You can't do it, only God can do it. So you hand it off, and God turns it into immense miracles, but you just made huge amounts of room in your field to receive. You can't get the new couch until you give away the old one. You can't get the new space cleaned up until you spend your trauma. When you spend it in the moment every day, it drops you back into presence. It drops you back into feeling your gut, helping you survive and thrive in the divine order. It helps you to objectify your thoughts. It helps you to be able to be totally and utterly in unconditional love for all of reality, because the only thing that is required for that level of love is existence itself. And then lastly, you get to have a lot more fun and easier time being a creative being, a being that dreams the dream on behalf of Source God. So just take a nice big deep breath, my friends. Enjoy this idea to wrap it all up in a big bow, knowing that it's your divine right to totally integrate, to have every tool you need to be able to fully wake up and enjoy being an immortal soul who's utilizing this body, who's inside and out, got access to every dimension. You don't have to go seek out any specific dimensions, but you come from the origin itself that created those dimensions in the first place. And thank you, Kari. I really appreciate your kindness. And yes, my classes tend to be very epic. They can be between 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 hours long. And I have taught many hundreds of classes. If you'd like to enjoy my books and my classes and my sessions, my website is prismatichuman.com, and I am available to you. I'm teaching a lot of really cool things, everything from remote viewing to being able to heal relationships, helping you heal your children, helping you to understand your soul skill sets and your past lives. helping you to understand galactic and earthly history, the real histories, not the fake ones, and being able to be a better, happier human, right on the verge of becoming a new type of being, a new human. Homo luminous is what we're headed towards. So, congratulations on this beautiful journey of yours today, really giving yourself that opportunity. And thank you, Andrew, for creating such a heartfelt, beautiful space for all of us to keep talking about transformation and becoming better and happier.
Yeah, thank you for being here and thank you for sharing all of your wonderful magic. This is awesome to not only hear your story, but to transform with you and learn how we can transform better. So thank you for sharing and thank you for being here so late today.
My pleasure. It's not that late, it's about 6 p.m. here, but it's a special place to bring energy into places and wrap everything up